All right, we got it. Liam, get back in here. We got it. We're in. I deleted enough stuff off my
All right,
thing.
nice.
Awesome. All right, sorry about that, Craig. I apologize. Here we go. All right. Welcome in episode lucky number 13 of the New England Sports Media Podcast, featuring the great Craig Larson from the Boston Globe, assistant sports editor, high school sports wizard, and our former boss. Craig, thanks for being with us.
I hate to hear the word former.
Well, maybe future again. Who knows, right? You never close the door on anything.
You're right. You're right. No, I have it's great pride and joy when I see, over the 4 years that I have been high school sports editor, and then at the Globe, for close to 15 now, all the former college students and Nighthawks that have gone on to do great things. And, it's pretty neat. So
I think that's kind of like it's kind of like where I wanted to start is like the kind of the operation that you run. Obviously, you're a full-time employee of the Globe veteran, and then you have some people who have been there for longer, like Jim Clark and Nate, but a lot of the work that's done is from kids who are in college at that time. How do you kind of like manage it? How do you go about like having these kids do professional work, but also teach them things and like let them learn? Because a lot of them are 18 years old when they come in.
Sure. And when I started, it was a bigger process because Bob Holmes was the high school sports editor and I was the regional sports editor. So we would conduct the interview process, the two of us, when we were having a co-op program, and we would have 3 or 4 new co-ops every 6 months. So that was kind of, you had those college students from Northeastern or BU or BC or UMass. They would come in for 6-month stints working 40 hours a week. And so a lot of them, that led to, they'd finish their co-op and then they'd still stay on as Hawks. So they'd already really been trained. And so that really was a huge asset for us. But we've had others, like the two of you, that just came in as Hawks and still work 2, 3, 4 days a week, covering a beat, doing games, working dayside Hawk shifts where you're taking phone calls from all over New England. And whether it's, what time are the Red Sox playing tonight, or should the Celtics make that trade, or you're writing thumbnails on the Red Sox or Celtics or Bruins next opponent. And there's nothing quite that matches working a Friday night. In the fall, which doesn't exist this year, when you have 100 high school football games coming in and your head is glued to your phone for about 3 hours straight. And that work under pressure, I think, prepares a lot of young writers about reality and how to turn around stories quickly. And you kind of jumping aboard the train. And some nights, there are stories that develop that you're not sure where it came from. And a couple nights ago, few years ago, we had on a Friday night a meaningless high school football game. There was a non-playoff game. Didn't come in until 5 minutes of 11, and it was a kid from Bellingham High School that set the state single game rushing record. I think it was like 485 yards. And so we reacted in like 15 minutes, reached out to I think it was Zach Levy was his name, and the coach. And you had a night where you had 10 or 12 other sectional finals in football, but this became the story of the night. So you have to be have flexibility, be creative, and, be ready for anything that comes your way. So, but I think back to, we've had, I look at the list that we have on our Hawk schedule, and we still have the list of those that have left. They're still on that deadline list. And there's 40 or 50 names there that are no longer active, but they're still on the list. And he said, wow, I remember him. I remember her, and some really great people that, have gone on to do exceptional things. And, Matt Porter was one of our first Hawks, wrote for us for Globe West, and now he's the beat writer for the Boston Bruins for us, and does a great job. And Jason Mastrodonato, is beat writer for the Red Sox for the Boston Herald. He was one of our first co-op students that I had for Globe North and did a tremendous job. And a number of others that have done exceptional work, helping us cover the schools. And, it was the starting point was Bob Holmes, and then I came along and we worked collaboratively together, and we made some great choices. Dan McClune, who's now working for the NBA. I'm sure you could recite a few others that have done great work. Rick Morin, a New Hampshire kid that went to, where'd he go, to Suffolk? He's down in Arizona, covering the Coyotes. Has done some college football, some baseball, across the board. I wish I had the list in front of me because I could point out this person's there. So they get tested under fire very quickly. And if they can do the work, their writing only gets better. And that positions them to, take the leap and go somewhere else. And received a number of emails or phone calls, said, hey, I accepted a job here. I accepted a job there. Can you give me a recommendation? Sure. And you're happy for them, but at the same point, you're saying, why are you going to Northern Maine to cover town politics or education? But it's the natural progression, and you just, every 6 months or every year, you're starting fresh with new writers. So, and you start over and try and do it again.
So you kind of embrace like the teaching role too, right? How do you kind of like, when did you sort of like get into this teaching role, and kind of how do you categorize that and explain it?
I think I've always had, no matter what paper I've been at, you've always had young writers that wanted to give it a shot. And it's been a transition because you have raw products and you're trying to find the best of what they do and encourage them to keep doing that, and then offer, because it's part of the industry, constructive criticism that's going to make them better. And hopefully they see that, and those that are passionate about it and embrace that, or come back at you, say, you're right, this works better. You don't want it to be too harsh, and this is what I learned when I came to the Globe, I probably edit harder than ever before, but ultimately we're producing a section. You want to not rein in a young writer's creativity, but you also, there's a way in longer stories to trim 100 words and still make it a great story. And you have to teach young writers to embrace that. The internet's one thing, but you still have to write on the subject and not lose the reader and draw them in and tell your story. So
absolutely. So there are a lot of kids like me who kind of come into the Globe without any sort of Massachusetts like institutional knowledge, but I feel like you have this just an absurd institutional Massachusetts knowledge. I'd be curious, like, can you rattle off a couple like games that you've covered or performances that you remember that kind of like define your career covering Massachusetts high school sports?
Well, I think initially I was doing more colleges because I was, as the regional sports editor, I was editing material, and then I was covering Harvard football for 10 years, and I covered Bentley basketball for 20 years, the men's and women's programs, and covered, national championship games with them at the Division II level. A Bentley men's basketball team that was 33-0 that went to Springfield, and great teamwork. And there have been some great high school Thanksgiving Day games too. And there's the state finals we've covered at the Boston Garden for
that's my favorite
basketball.
Day. I love that.
Or the state semifinals at the Garden that have been thrilling to watch. And it's just, and that these days, that's where a lot of the live action I see is during the tournament, because during the regular season, it's just so busy. You have your young writers out there and you're going through the editing process. And then you're trying to capture Thanksgiving games or state finals. And it's funny, I was just doing some research because Carolyn Swords, who is now in the WNBA finals for the Las Vegas Aces, she actually retired in February to be, do marketing position with them. And then now is her last game. She played 31 minutes.
Yeah.
6'6". She's out of Lincoln Sudbury, and played at Boston College. And I recall the story we did in 2007 when she was in the state final against Hampshire Regional, and it was at the Worcester Centrum. And Jackie McMullen was sitting next to me, and she wrote a column on that Lincoln Sudbury team.
Wow.
Because the school had gone through a horrifying experience where a student had been stabbed to death. And we sent Jackie there to do a column on the bonding of these, quote, sisters. And I recalled that column that Jackie wrote 13 years ago because I was sitting there. And that came up in a news meeting today that we had with our fellow sports editors. And we wanted, it's a good, compelling story to revisit with Carolyn now that she's, 8-year veteran in WNBA,
right.
And that brings it back to the local. And so those things you don't forget. And hopefully in this day with what we're going through now with the pandemic, and you have currently the Red Sox season is over. The Bruins season is over. The Celtics season is over. We're entering the month of October with only the Patriots playing and 2 college football programs in New England, Boston College and UMass with a few games, and that's it.
Right.
Usually October is tremendously busy, and this year we're looking for story ideas that we wouldn't normally be doing right now. And so we have to be creative and really brainstorm. And that's, I said, okay, here we go. Let's look back to Carolyn Swords. And that goes back to the high schools. So
absolutely. So now, like when you're doing this job, you're obviously, the high school kids are all young kids, they're at max, they're 18, 19 years old. Sometimes you're probably covering kids, sometimes are 14, 13 years old. How important do you think it is to tell these kids stories, leave their impression? And in years later, do they ever come back to you or when they covered them and say, like, thank you for this, thank you for that, 20, 15 years later?
Well, interesting story. As you know, the Globe, with the cooperation of Richard Phelps, does a scholar athlete program every year. And this was the 30th year that we've been involved with Richard Phelps, who's a tremendous individual that really shares this in funding this award with us. And so in doing our research of the recipients, and there's 14 per year back to 1990, I came across Becky Blazer, who was a great athlete at Masconomet Regional. And as a soccer player, all New England, all EMAS, and she was a basketball player too. And she went to Harvard to play soccer before the injury ended her career. But she also, at that time, when she was at Harvard, was working as a hawk on the Globe desk.
Wow.
And was working on the copy desk. And but she was one of our scholar athlete recipients. So this year when we were having our scholar athlete presentation in June, I was looking for a guest speaker. And I circled back, here's someone who that was a recipient of the award, went to Harvard, and then just finished an 18-year career as a director of communications for Massachusetts Golf. And she was on our Zoom call when we had the ceremony back in June. I think you were on that call.
Yeah. Yep.
And Becky was so thankful and talked about how much it meant to her to be involved in that and what we did. And then she had an extra appreciation because she came and worked on our desk too, on the copy desk and the hawk desk, and knew all the individuals that were involved. And that was expressed by others that Bob Holmes talked about. He talked to James Perry, who was a recipient out of Malden Catholic and went on to set every passing record that existed at Brown University, and now has returned as their head coach. So that, and we have another one, Mike Lopez, that was at Lincoln Sudbury playing as a lineman for his father. Now he's the chief statistician for the NFL. And I have a history with Mike when I was at the Metro West Daily News before the Globe. As a high school senior, he came and worked on our Hawk desk there. So, and so we left an impression, and that's all you need to hear. So,
yeah, I mean, there's plenty of talk about what high school sports reporting had been during the summer, and obviously working with the MIAA and figuring out what they're playing, when they're playing. In a nutshell, you don't have to go too long into it because I'm sure it was quite a time, but what was the experience like just reporting on, are they going to play, how are they going to play, and like just what went into that whole like months long experience?
Well, I think, it started when in March, the day after the state semifinals scheduled for the Garden for basketball and hockey, and I was at the Garden those days, and you could get a sense this is going to be it.
I mean, I remember
the COVID numbers were coming in, and it just, you get a sense from the MI officials that this is not going to happen. We're putting kids' safety at risk. And so once they shut it down in March, and, we looked ahead to April, and then the date kept getting pushed back. Okay, we'll come back in April. We'll go April 29th. We'll try and get started May 6th. We can put together an 8-week or 6-week regular season and have a short tournament. Mm-hmm. Okay, now we're just going to do a regular season with no tournament.
Right.
And so it was daily, weekly reporting, and then you kind of had a lull in July and seeing if there was hope of a return. Really didn't happen until late August that, where we were getting direction from the State Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, DESA, and the Environmental and Energy Affairs Group, EEA, that it was going to have to be done differently. And we still are reporting every day.
Right.
And because it's such a fluid situation, and you don't know day to day what school system is going to shut down and go remote. And just yesterday, Natick High School is shutting down for 2 weeks and going totally remote. There will be no athletics, robotics, or band.
Did I see Bridgewater Raynham had some cases today too?
Bridgewater Raynham has some 13 cases now. Yeah. So I haven't talked to our good friend Jim Seavey in the last few days, but he's that's close to his heart. So it's every hour monitoring, and we have 2 writers right now who are on MIA sport committee calls, and there are constant updates there just about the future because we're going to a statewide tournament for 2021, and a lot of dynamics that are in play there are being impacted by us going to 4 seasons this fall, or not being able to use max preps for power seedings and no state tournaments for the fall. So it couldn't come at a worse time. And hopefully somehow they can get through 4 seasons and give kids an experience out there on the field and be able to engage, and seniors. And we get a vaccine at some point in the near future so we can kind of get back to a new normal.
For sure. Two more things I want to touch on. We'll save the all scholastics piece for last. The first thing I want to touch on, though, is this fall, announced yesterday, you guys are tracking scores from everywhere. Like you said, the Berkshires to Boston and everything in between. How did the kind of model of what you're tracking and deadline, or just like the coverage this fall, obviously with less sports, how did that change, and how did you implement the plan?
Well, we had to look at what's going to be most informative for readers. And I thought we could not just have our line drawn at Route 495. And this is a state issue, and especially with us going to a statewide tournament for 21, that I thought that we had to look at not just conferences and leagues in Eastern Massachusetts, but we had to do it for the entire state. And that's where, the addition of Jim Clark to our staff has been immense. And, he has such knowledge for Central and Western Massachusetts. as far as through his hockey coverage, that he was able to track down all that information for every league. And he has roots, as a Central Mass guy, and then he went to UMass. So he really was diligent about really raising the bar for us and getting Western Mass and Central Mass tracked. And then we did that for the 280 schools in Eastern Massachusetts. So I thought it was important to take a broader look at that. And so we were able to pull that off. But it changes daily, changes hourly. So you have to update and see which school's active and which one is inactive for this fall season.
The last thing I want to touch on is, I think, one of the kind of crown jewel moments 3 times a year for you and me when I was with you and the staff is the All Scholastic, when that page comes out. When that page comes out after every season, just like from your standpoint as kind of like the leader of this operation, just like what are your emotions every time it comes out?
I know there's probably no better commute home from the office when we are in the office than on the Thursday evening, because we traditionally put a deadline of Thursday evening where we finish all the print pages for the All Scholastic section. It's printed Friday morning at our plant in Taunton, and then it goes live online on Friday afternoon, Friday night, Saturday, in print on Sunday. But when you hit the button after proofing every single page 4 to 5 times, and you're done 3 times a year, but when you're done with that 16-page section, every sport covered, make sure that every league all-star is published, hopefully, when you're talking about 4,000 to 5,000 names. That's great satisfaction. Now, you might get an email the next morning saying there was one student athlete that's left out of a league all-star.
Yeah.
Never has happened with a All Scholastic individual selection. But, it's great satisfaction because there's so much time and effort that goes into it. It's not perfect, and it's not a perfect system because for instance, for basketball, you're selecting 25 individuals from 24 leagues in Eastern Massachusetts. That's where our All Scholastic section is limited to Eastern Mass leagues. So, we place heavy influence on
You were in and out there, I guess.
I thought you were in or out.
So. I don't know. That's the classic main thing, but no, that's fine. That's good. I'll just do a quick wrap. I'll tell Liam to cut it out. Again, thanks, Craig, for joining us. New England Sports Media Podcast, episode 13, another Globey, and we appreciate that. And everyone can tune in soon on all of the platforms, and we'll be back next time.
Okay, take care.